So with that, we won't take any more of his time. General Welsh, thank you for being with us here this morning.
Thank you, folks. Just for those who don't know what the TG-7 is, it's a badass airplane. And you look really good sitting in it, which is why I like it. I've got a list of topics here, and I don't know which ones I'm going to talk about, so bear with me. What I really would like to do is get to the things that you'd like to talk about. So let me make some opening comments about a couple of things I just think are worth mentioning, and then we'll talk about anything you want. And I look forward to that, actually. Let me talk, first of all, about some things that I think still matter to the Air Force, especially matter today to our Air Force. And the first one's manpower. Now, we talk a lot about technical things, we talk a lot about capabilities, we talk a lot about mission sets, but the biggest problem we've got in the Air Force right now is manpower. And just about everything that we're dealing with that's frustrating us is manpower related. And every problem we have with growing, with modernizing, with increasing mission capability is manpower related. And so if you think about the Air Force in terms of we have this many people, and we have this much stuff that we've been operating in the past that we're having trouble divesting, so we're still operating, and we're doing X amount of things with those people and those platforms, and now we've been told to add new cyber capability, new space capability, new ISR capability, add the F-35. Even if somebody gives us all the money in the world to do those things, we got this much manpower. And you can't have it doing all the stuff it's been doing and still add this new stuff on top. There's nothing complex about this. It's not a complicated problem, it's just where we are. And so something's got to give in this equation. What we can't do is take that same number of people and just expand all the things they're doing by thinning out every mission area. And instead of being 85% manned, let's go to 65% manning in all these other places so we stand up the new stuff. And make these people work harder and harder and harder. Because the operations tempo continues to go up, not down. And we're not divesting any operational activity either. We haven't come out of any part of the world that we've been in for the last 15, 25 years. And so manpower is a major issue to us. And so when people start talking about the Air Force and what the issues are and what the proposals are and where we're trying to go, always base it on this idea of people are a limiting factor right now. And adding more burden to them in any way, shape, or form is a bad idea. Because we'll get through all the other issues we're dealing with. If we start losing these people because they're just completely worn out, they're tired now, but if we completely wear them out and they leave, we're in trouble. So start with that. Second thing is readiness matters. And for the Air Force, readiness matters even more than it matters to the other services. Total force readiness matters. Because for the Air Force, when you talk about response to a crisis of any type, we respond as a total force, active guard and reserve. When you hear the Army or the Navy or the Marine Corps talk about numbers of units that are available to respond or units that must respond within certain timelines, the numbers they're talking are all active duty. Always just active duty. In the Air Force, it's always the total force. When you hear us talk about 55 fighter squadrons, that's total force. 9 bomber squadrons is total force. ISR platforms is total force. Number of caps is total force. And so our response requirements dictate that our entire force be ready, active guard and reserve. They have to be trained to the same standard. They have to have the same qualifications. They have to have the same periodicity of evaluations because they're all responding together. We don't have the luxury of spinning up the guard over an 18-month period because we have enough active duty to cover the initial response. That's just not the way we're organized and equipped. And to do it that way, we would need 2 to 3 times the force structure we have today, and that's just not going to happen. So manpower matters, readiness matters. It matters in a big way. The other thing you need to think about in a readiness perspective is that it's not just the total force that has to be involved, it's how quickly everybody is involved. Within the first couple of months of any future conflict, almost 100% of our Air Force is required to be deployed in a major conflict. So we got to be ready now. So in the Air Force, we're either ready or we're not. There is no real gradient in there that we can worry about. Tiered readiness doesn't work for us. Never will. The other thing that matters significantly to us is modernization. This is something that's really, really important. The people who pay attention to what I say hear me talk about modernization every time I open my mouth. We have got to be ready, capable, and equipped to win the fight today. And we've got to be ready, capable, viable against the threat, and equipped to win the fight 15 years from now, 25 years from now, 40 years from now. That's not going to change. And all the stuff that we have today is not going to make us successful 10, 20, 30 years from now. It just won't. And so part of the Air Force's problem is this constant look to the future. We have to be modernizing. There's no other option. It's modernize or fail. And so this has to be a steady drumbeat when we talk about air power. And with platform-based services, Air Force and Navy in particular, the lead time is a little longer than it is for a soldier or a Marine-based service to get that modernization in place. And so right now, we need to be worried about 2030 and being able to win the fight in 2030. And the capabilities we have today may not be successful on that battlefield. In some scenarios, in some cases, they will not be successful. Modernization is kind of our lifeblood. We have to do it. Because the other thing you need to keep in mind is that air power also matters. It matters in a big way. You know, today, in modern warfare, when nations mass their armies on the field of battle, the nation that's going to win is not the one with the biggest army. It's not necessarily the one that has the most tanks or the longest range on our artillery system. The one that's going to win is the one with the best air force. And I think I can make a pretty dominant case in that argument. That doesn't mean that air power is preeminent. It's not. But it is equally as critical as land and maritime power. And if you don't have it, you will lose in the future war, in the future fight. So we've got to be thinking about that as a nation. If you want to use your military instrument of national power the way we have in the past, you better be strong in every one of those components. And they require investment. They require attention. They require care and feeding. There's very few absolutes in my mind in modern warfare, but there are a couple. Let me highlight just a handful that I think are worth us thinking about. First is that firepower at the point of attack still matters. And we need more of it. More firepower, more quickly, more precisely than we have today. That's going to be critical for us in the future. Second is that that point of attack is often moving. And now it's moving at the speed of light in some cases. And so you need that firepower not just through the air domain, you need it not just kinetically, you need it through the cyber domain, you need it in through and from the space domain, and clearly you have to have different types of effects you're creating than the effects you've created in the past. You need precision in every one of those domains. Third, I believe information is now the coin of the realm, and it will continue to be the coin of the realm in warfare. The enterprise that generates it, that collects it, that moves it, that processes it, that analyzes it, that disseminates it to decision makers, that enterprise will always be a priority in the future. Has to be. And it should be a focus of our Air Force because we are dependent on it. Fourth, other nations are treating space as a battlefield, a big battlefield. And we better be ready to fight there. A lot of effort we're making in the Air Force these days to do that. Air Force Space Command has taken the lead on this. I've been very, very impressed by General John Height and his entire team and the way he shifted the focus to at least thinking about the space domain as a warfighting domain. We don't want to fight there, but we better be ready to, because other people clearly are posturing themselves to be able to do that. And then fifth, something I referenced a minute ago, the weapon systems that made us great for the last 50 years are not the ones that will make us great for the next 50. We just have to wrap our minds around that and move forward. Because if we don't, we will eventually fail. And the final one is that without air power, you will lose. Just the way warfare is. Next thing I mentioned that matters is the air power discussion because of all that. And I'd like to thank AFA and the Mitchell Institute for helping to drive that discussion. There is a much different level of debate going on today, even on issues that I might not agree with, that I believe are important issues to be on the table. I think we ought to be debating the capabilities of the Air Force, the capabilities of the air services of the other, or the air components of the other services, because they're pretty phenomenally good at what they do as well. We ought to be talking about modernization, where missions fit together, where they overlap, where we can save money, and where we need more capability. That ought to be a debate. There ought to be a debate about where air power fits in the joint scheme of priority. Because really we ought to be looking at 20, 30 years from now from a joint perspective and deciding what the U.S. military must have. Prioritize funding along that list, and where it falls, it falls. And how that affects the Air Force, it affects the Air Force. I think the Air Force will stand up very well in the discussion, by the way. But I think that's the debate we have to have, and be willing to have. Types of things we ought to be discussing these days: future of ISR. What does it really look like 10, 15, 20, 50 years from now? Because it shouldn't look like what we have today. What is the future of service component cyber capabilities and authorities? Right now, our services are supporting Cybercom and supporting NSA and others in doing cyber activity. Our people are involved in it. Our component commanders are not involved in it. They don't have authorities to operate the cyber domain. They don't have capabilities at their disposal to conduct their core missions in, through, or from cyber. That's where we need to go. That's where the Air Force is aiming. How do we do our 5 core missions in, through, and from this new domain? In a completely different way than we've done the missions in the past. Right now, we're aiming in that direction, but we're not even close to where we need to be in that regard. We need to look at the future of command and control. It's constantly evolving. It's not going to stop evolving. We have some good infrastructure, a good baseline to start from, but command and control is going to evolve, change, adjust. It's got to be faster. It's got to be more flexible. It's got to be more interconnected. It's got to be all those things if it's going to be successful. Many of you are involved in that. Thanks for the work you do on the concepts and the actual capability. We should be looking at the next generation of air-launched weapons and the next generation of cyber weapons. It's time right now to think about what we're going to be using 15, 20 years from now. What do those weapons look like? What kind of effects are we trying to create in that new airspace, that new battle space? And the last thing I'll mention is that airmen matter. They always have, they always will. The education, the training, the professional development that we put into them is absolutely essential to the nation's success. And we can't skimp on that at all. We shouldn't take a dime out of that. In fact, we ought to be adding more resources to it. It's chump change compared to the capability money we spend elsewhere. Those airmen also deserve the best possible care we can give them, whether it's medical care for them and their families, whether it's victim care if they happen to be a victim of something, whether it's family care while they're out doing the nation's work. All that stuff is something I believe we owe them. And all the programs that ensure that they feel encouraged, enabled, valued, all those things must be a continuous focus for us. You can never take your eyes off of it. So everything from equal opportunity programs to sexual assault prevention, to violence prevention, to harassment in the workplace, to family care, to diversity programs, all that has to be a focus each and every day for every commander, every supervisor. And until it is, we don't unlock the potential of our force the way we could. And so we work pretty hard at that, and we got to keep focused on it. Because I don't think we can ever lose sight of the fact that despite the articles we see occasionally in the press about people who do stupid stuff, which happens in every kind of organization, the great, great, great majority of people in our Air Force are frankly, legally dedicated, committed, patriotic, brave, courageous, and wonderful people. That's just who they are. I would compare this workforce to any workforce on the planet. And I'm really going to miss it.
If you all would be kind enough, General Welsh has agreed to answer questions. We'd ask that you identify who you are and what organization you're with, and we'll move from there. We have 2 mics that can move right.
Thanks, sir.
Sir, George Nicholson with the Global Special Operations Foundation Forces. A couple of months ago, at a meeting over at the Atlantic Council, General Miller, the Commandant, started off his remarks by saying one of my biggest concerns right now as the Marine Corps is our dependence upon GPS and SATCOM. A week later, Admiral Richardson over at AEI said the same thing. The month after that, General Miller was over at the New American Foundation being interviewed by Pete Singer, held up Pete Singer's book, Ghost Fleet, and said this should be required read for every Marine officer. Again, going back to the issue of their concerns about GPS, SATCOM, and maybe in black programs right now, where is the Air Force going right now to help solve that problem?
We've been actually working on non-GPS solutions, even as a backup, for a while. And so I think that there's a logic to this that goes along with my comment about modernization. You can't sit still in this business. And as soon as you do, the enemy will take away an option. Now, one of the things that I think has happened over time, if we built the blueprint for the world's greatest airport. I didn't build it. Some of you had a hand in that. But our Air Force is pretty darn good. But that blueprint is available for anybody else to look at, and they've been looking at it. And they have built capabilities and even capacity in some mission areas that are exactly in the seams of the blueprint that we built. There's something to this asymmetric approach. And so we have got to look at how do we make sure people can't take away advantages that we've had in the past through other developments if we ever run into conflict with those particular people in the future. And so everywhere we think that there's an advantage that we've lost or are at risk of losing, there is an effort to figure out how to regain the advantage. I don't know of a single area where that's not true, including this one. And so I think this is clearly stuff the Air Force can't do on its own. We rely on industry to do this. We rely on academia to come up with the concepts. There are a whole lot of people involved in this across this great nation of ours, and we have got to keep energizing that debate, that discussion. The one thing that I'm leaving too early in my mind from this job in one area, we haven't fully connected industry, academia, the rest of think tanks, the rest of the country to our developmental planning effort yet. It's just too nascent. We're just restarting developmental planning. I took our first out brief of our first capability collaboration team yesterday, the final brief on the air superiority capability collaboration team. It was fantastic. I could not be happier with the first effort that we made to put together a template that we can apply to this capability development process in the future. I mean, I'm really excited about it. But the one thing we didn't do well is tie in industry, academia, and think tanks. The people who think differently than we think early in the process. The people who bring a practical understanding of production rates, technology development rates, plausibility, possibility. We are not as good at that as other people are, and we need to get those partners in the room faster and more consistently for these discussions. So that's where we're trying to go. I'm not happy where that is yet, so that's one I'll pass off to my successor and say, please don't slow down in this area. This is critically important for us. And it'll help get us farther ahead of the curve on issues like this. But if you go out to AFRL today, they're excited about this topic. Yes, ma'am.
Lara Sallyman with Defense News.
Hello, ma'am.
Hi, thanks for being here. The Pentagon recently released its 2016 long-term aviation plan, 30-year plan. And they said that the Air Force is not going to be able to afford the number of fighter jets it requires past 2021. So is the only, I mean, that seems like an unacceptable situation. So is the only solution asking for a higher top line, or is there something you can do barring that, maybe buying fewer new fighter jets and putting more money into retaining the older ones? What is the plan there to fill the gap?
Yeah, it depends on what you want the Air Force to do. And it all starts with a pretty simple question, actually, from my perspective. The question isn't what are we going to do year to year to year to year, which is kind of how we end up planning and operating and talking, because that's how our budget cycle works. The question is, what does the United States of America want its military instrument of national power to be able to do 20, 30, 50 years from now? Do we want to be the global superpower in 2050? By the way, it's not my question to answer. If the answer is yes, then there are a certain set of things that have to happen for us to be able to do that as a nation. And it doesn't involve just the military instrument of national power, it involves all the instruments of national power. But if you want to continue to use your military as if you are the global superpower, then it's going to require investment. And we can tell you where those investments need to be, based on the likely scenarios, the most catastrophic scenario. We can do lots of discussion about that. There can be a lot of debate about what's right or wrong. But what you can't argue is that if you want to act like the global superpower, that you're not going to respond to events around the world. And you need a military as part of that response capability. If we want to be a superpower or a global power, one of them, there's a whole different approach you can take to how you use your military instrument of national power. And there's a different set of things you wanted to do, probably not as comprehensive a set of things. And then you can design a different military, and we can tell you what that should look like. But somebody's got to make that first decision. And it should then drive decisions across the board in our government. I'm hoping that debate continues to be a robust one and those kind of decisions are made. Because that's really where the discussion ought to start. It shouldn't start with how many airplanes does the Air Force need. Because for what we've been asked to do, for what is in the current strategic documents and the strategic guidance, we don't have enough today. That's not news to anybody. We've been saying that for 4 years. So what is the Air Force supposed to be doing? What is the Joint Force supposed to be doing? Start with that question. And then we can decide whether we have enough or not. Right now in our budget, we have got a path laid out. Everything we have in our plan, we have the money for. Except for the nuclear recapitalization after a couple of the programs are already ongoing. We don't have the money in our program for that. If we need to add all these new things, we'd also don't have the money for the people operating. Back to the manpower issue I mentioned. So something has got to give there, and it will eventually. There's a lot of great people in this country who don't intend to break the United States Air Force or the other services. And our problems are not unique. It's the same problem the other services have right now. So there's just got to be some higher level questions and answers. And then we'll figure out as a nation where we go next. I'm pretty confident in the United States of America. We'll figure it out. Yes, sir. Jack, would you hand me the nectar of life there? Thank you.
Hi, sir. James Drew from Flight Global. Can I ask you about the Arsenal plane, loyal wingman, and also swarming drones? And where do all these things fit into the future Air Force as you see it? And are these principal ways that you might be able to mitigate some of these aircraft shortfalls in the future?
Yeah, thank you, sir. Maybe. I think where they fit in right now is they have to be part of that modernization discussion. We have to be looking at what would they do for you. If you can, you mentioned swarms, for example. Instead of buying new systems that cost $1 billion to put into geosynchronous orbit, if there was a way to release a swarm that could give you an ISR picture by soaking a region with some kind of sensor combination and doing it quickly, maybe it relieves you of the requirement to have a globally looking eye in space that costs that much money. If it's practical to approach it that way, we should figure that out and be ready to use that. It gives us a different response capability, maybe the same capability in the tactical and operational level and in those time frames, and it does it for a lot less money if we can improve the technology. If it doesn't provide a better response capability, more efficiency, more effectiveness in the battle space, then we shouldn't pursue it. But we got to look at it and figure it out. And so we've been focused a lot more on demonstrations, experimentation. How do we get to that kind of work so we can kind of incrementally step into ideas, not programs. Prove the idea, and then figure out how to develop a program from there. This is all part of that integration with think tanks, industry, academia. This should be a discussion that leads to experimentation, demonstrations, and then we see where we go from there. So we think we need to test all this stuff. That's why we've been pushing these ideas.
Are we closer to getting a loyal wingman in an operational environment?
Well, if you look at, you can go on YouTube right now and you can find small unmanned aircraft flying in formation. And you can find them flying off the same signal in formation. Swarm technology is essentially the same thing. You see demonstrations on YouTube today of swarms doing things together. It's essentially the same concept. If you can take an F-35 and instead of having 20 F-35s, have 4 F-35s with, a number of autonomous wingmen flying alongside them doing tasks to protect the F-35, to provide more sensor data to help it target, maybe carrying extra munitions, whatever you want them to do. If you can do that for less cost than having 20 F-35s, then we should be considering that. Now, I don't know what's going to prove out here, James. I don't know what the right answer is going to be. But we should be looking at this kind of capability. We have to. It's like looking at non-GPS navigation. I don't know the right answer, but I know there's other ways and concepts for how it could be done. We ought to be out there trying and seeing what plays out as being the best solution. What we can't do is wait until somebody proves a technology or a concept who's not us, and then figure out 5 to 8 years later how to turn it into a program. That is not responsive enough to today's world. We've got to get ahead of that curve. We're behind the idea curve, and we got to get ahead of it. Hey, John.
Good morning, General. John Turpak, Air Force Magazine. Recently, the numbers on the B-21 used to be 80 to 100. Now it seems like you've settled on 100. Is that the right number, or do you think a higher number is right in the future? And as they come in, will you be retiring the B-52s, or do you think you can be holding on to them for a while to kind of beef up the force in light of the world situation?
Yeah. On the second half, I think the Global Strike Command is finalizing the actual bed down concept, the numbers, etc. And I think a lot of that will depend on what budgets look like in that time frame, what the threats look like, how much of a bomber fleet we think we need to have in place, and we have money to keep in place. We'll have the same issue then that we have now with the F-35 coming on board. If we don't replace something with it, then we don't have manpower to bed the new thing down. And so we'll have the same problem with the bomber. But it'll all depend on what the top lines look like, what else we think we can divest or are able to divest, and what the threat looks like. On the numbers part of this, I have no idea what the right number is, and neither does anybody else right now. My concern is, if we start a debate about numbers right now, it's not going to help the program. I think the numbers debate is 8 to 10 years from now. And I think it's a fair debate, and I think there can be lots of work done between now and then. but the debate on the actual number is not today's discussion. What we need to do right now is get the program solidly on track, keep it under cost, on schedule, keep it moving forward in a meaningful way. And as we get to the point where we're actually getting into a test program, we've got models of the airplane flying, we take a look at the future, we take a look at the emerging threat, we take a look at the development of capabilities in other air forces. At that time, we'll have a lot better projection of what it will look like 10 to 15 years beyond that. And then we can have the discussion about numbers. The unhealthy thing about the numbers debate right now is for every article that appears where somebody says it should be 185 and here's why, there'll be another one just to counter it that says, no, it should be 25 and here's why. And now we get into a debate that right now is not really well informed for the time period that will be affected by this. It's a great discussion. I love the discussion about the bomber fleet, the requirement, but I just don't think this is the time to decide that. This would have been like having a debate about numbers of F-35s 10 to 12 years ago. And it wouldn't have been healthy, well-informed, it wouldn't have understood the threat that we're now facing 10 to 15 years from now. I just think it's too early for that to be a decision kind of discussion. That's Mark's opinion. There are lots of other opinions on this one, I understand. I just don't know that it helps us at this point. So 100 is the number for us.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I want to introduce myself, Chief Bob Elder, George Mason University. Chief, I had a question about, it seems like there's a lot of pressure on the Hill. There's discussions about Goldwater nickel. There's been some discussion about trying to go to doing away with service components, and what that suggests to me is that people on the Hill don't have an appreciation of the value of the componency and getting the different alternatives presented to a commander or president. And I'm wondering if you could talk at all about, perhaps with you and your fellow Joint Chiefs can talk about in terms of this lack of appreciation for the components.
Yes, sir. I'm not sure that's what it is. I think it's more this view that we've downsized the force dramatically over the last 25 years, and we haven't downsized the general and flag officer ranks proportionally. I think it's a fair question. Why haven't? The exact way to do that, the number you're going to go to, I think, is the point of debate. We tried in the Air Force last year. I actually wanted to reduce a couple of 4 stars and a number of 3 stars. We tried to do it. Tried to cut 15 3-star billets and wanted to reduce 2 4 stars. It's very difficult to reduce them. Even if we want to do it, it's hard to do it. So it's going to be an interesting discussion as you move forward, because those senior positions are coming out of somebody's district, somebody's state. They're coming out of commands that have a lot of constituency themselves, and so it'll be an important, I believe, but an interesting discussion. And so I think it's a fair debate to happen. I think if we can't justify the positions, if we can't explain why you need officers of a certain rank doing certain tasks, then maybe they shouldn't be there. I mean, some of this is on us. And so I don't think we should be scared of that debate. I think it's a fair discussion to have. So I don't think that's going to be a major issue. There'll be lots of different positions taken on it. There'll be some that are just right at the tail of the Hun, and some that are, let's start over here soft and ease our way into it. And I don't know what the right answer is. It's probably somewhere in the middle. But I think that's how we'll get there. Even the Attila the Hun positions are typically not because someone really believes that's the right answer, it's because they know the position will get watered down as they get into the debate, and they're hoping to get to that solution in the middle. And I think it's on us now to justify positions and why we need certain officers at certain grades in those positions. I haven't heard anybody talk about getting rid of components. What I've heard people talk about is dropping the rank of components. And again, if we can't justify the need for officers of a certain rank in those components, then we may lose them. We may have to drop them already. And so I think it's over to us now. Make the justification, logically explain why you need people in these positions. I think you can in many cases. I don't think this is ever going to be an across-the-board, one rule fits everything. I think we're going to have the discussion. But there'll be lots of constituencies, I think, on every side of this problem. When we tried last year to cut 15 3-stars, we got 8. And the others were just a bridge too far. Not because of the airport resistance, but because of resistance from elsewhere. And I think we'll have the same discussion this year. The real thing to think about is if we reduce senior officer positions, is there is a ripple that goes with that. So as you have to free up positions in your lower level ranks to cover those positions. So if all your 4-star positions become 3-star positions, you now need that many of your 3-star positions to become 2-star positions, and so forth. And every one of those will affect somebody in some place. And so it's going to be a pretty robust discussion. But I don't think we should be scared of it. I think we should be able to tell our story clearly on this. So we're ready for the discussion. The bigger discussion for us is the idea of balance of expertise across military leadership positions. Another fair discussion, I think, and I don't think there's been anything done wrong in the past, but we have an awful lot of people who are really well qualified in every service now to serve in joint leadership positions. And so that balance is important in my mind over time for a joint force. If you're going to think in a joint way, then you need to have had experience in organizations at every level with joint leadership that is getting joint, it changes. You know, I don't think the Air Force should have one command, and that should always be an Air Force command. I think that it becomes focused on an Air Force way of doing business, an Air Force way of thinking. I don't think that's healthy for the joint force. And so I would like to see that change, see an Army or Navy or Marine Corps officer come in and command every now and then. And I think that should be true of every command. And until it is, we won't really have joint baked in at conception. We just try and throw it in at birth. And I think that's a little late. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, sir. Courtney Albin with Inside the Air Force. There's been some discussion recently on the Hill about potentially exploring a restart of the F-22 production line. And I just wondered, is that something that you see as kind of like a pie-in-the-sky discussion, or do you think there's merit to it? And then also, I know there were studies several years ago into the cost and feasibility of that. Has the Air Force done any more recent analysis into that, and what are some of the things that you're looking at, I guess?
Yeah, no, I don't think it's a wild idea. I mean, the success of the F-22 and the capability of the airplane and the crews that fly it is pretty exceptional. I think it's proven that the airplane is exactly what everybody hoped it would be. And we're using it in new and different ways. It's been spectacularly successful, and its potential is really, really remarkable. And so going back and looking at somebody raising the idea, well, could you build more, is not a crazy idea. I think you've heard the Secretary in the past say that, the Secretary of the Air Force say that we think it's cost prohibitive. And we're going back right now and looking in detail at the number. What would it cost? Because we were asked by Congress to go do that. So we're in the process right now doing that, Courtney. I haven't seen the results of that yet. I don't know what the actual number is. But we'll find out here pretty quickly exactly what we think the number would be and what the cost would be and what the pros and cons would be of trying to get there from here. And we're working with the company as well to figure that out. So we'll have an answer. I don't have it yet.
When do you expect to have that?
I don't know. I just don't know. There is a timeline on this, Courtney. I just don't know what it is. I don't remember. Anybody who's here with me remember that number? Courtney, we can find out for you. Why don't we, Chris Moore. Chris, would you mind? Let's go back and get that, and we'll give you a call, Courtney, or Chris will give you a note. Just let you know what that time frame is, so we expect that answer to be done. The good news is, this is about that air power discussion in my mind. People are understanding, I think, a lot of people are understanding that you can't keep cutting the number of fighter squadrons we have. I mean, the fighter squadrons, bomber squadrons, ISR are kind of the meat and potatoes of our Air Force. They're not always the sexiest thing people want to talk about. They're not always new things, but they're the things we're using every day. And they're the things that are in demand in the combatant commands. And so the idea that we don't have enough squadrons and people continue to want to cut them or not give us enough money for them, that's now a major discussion point. So this is a way of looking at, rather than thinking of a sixth-generation fighter, can you modify the F-22 and reopen the line cheaper and keep the numbers up? I don't know. Should we go to a high-low force mix over time as opposed to a completely high-end fifth-generation force? Probably have to. How do you get there from here? I don't know. That's what we're working on right now. But that's part of the debate we're having with our capability collaboration teams, this developmental planning effort, because we've just got to open the spectrum up a little wider and talk about how we're going to get the job done 20 years from now. Not what airplanes we're going to keep or have. The job can be done a lot of ways now. It's always going to be with an airplane. Let me go, I'll come back to here. I guess hope people haven't had a chance to.
Hi, John Simmons with the Roosevelt Group. Wanted to get back to manpower discussion. We've been involved for 2 years fighting the drawdown of the Army and finally getting traction on the Hill to try and prevent that from going further. What should the end strength be of the Air Force for both active and reserve, especially when you're looking to stand up a new active RPA wing, grow your cyber mission forces? What's that number?
Yeah, it depends on what really we want the Air Force to do and be healthy doing. I'm a believer that the Air Force needs to be healthy and be able to maintain a battle rhythm over time Because what most people don't understand about the Air Force is how many people are supporting ongoing operations around the world every day. The number's about 210 to 220,000 people in our Air Force are supporting ongoing operations right now. They're not all deployed forward. They're not all stationed overseas. A lot of them are in the U.S., but they're working 24/7, running satellite constellations, providing precision navigation timing for every operation around the world, communication support, monitoring activity in space, nuclear alert, in the ICBM fields, the ISR community, the command and control community. I mean, we have people who are nonstop supporting combat operations, and they're in units that are manned way less than 100%. And so the pace of this support is wearing people out. It's not just the units that are deploying, although they're tired too. And the other services have the same problem with the units that are deploying, in fact, and those communities are just tired. Our AFSOC community is just like the rest of the special operations world. We've been in and out, one-to-one deploy to go for basically 25 years now. But we have a whole bunch of other communities in the Air Force that are involved every day supporting activity from home station. And the pace of that is actually wearing. It's not relaxing. It's not like a training environment. And so they get training on the side when they get training, which is another problem with the readiness equation. They're doing the operational mission so much that they don't have time to go do the other kind of missions they could be tasked to do in a different scenario. And that's all part of our readiness issue. So we've got to figure out how to get enough people into those units that we can get a lifestyle and a battle rhythm they can maintain over a career, not just over the next year or two. The RPA community is a perfect example of this. That community has surged 9 times over the last 7 years. And what surge means is that they fly 10 caps more than we have the people to fly. And they've been doing it 9 times over the last 7 years. And by the way, it's for months at a time typically. And when they surge, that means they go from 6 on, 1 off to 7 on, none on. That's kind of what they've been dealing with. And it's not because we've been ignoring it that is still a problem. It's because the number of caps we fly has continued to just go up. Every time we build a plan to man the new ones, the requirement goes up before we get the new ones manned. So we're always chasing this rabbit. And until that stabilizes and we man the force to do it, we're going to be where we are today with manpower. My belief is the near-term solution is we're going to 321,000, which is where we've got to get to do what we're doing today. That doesn't change the fact that we're going to be 84% manned on airfields. To get to 100% manning, or as close as you can realistically get to 100% manning and do this right, and add the F-35, and add the new cyber capability and space capability we've been told to develop, to do all that, my guess, 40 to 60,000 more people. And it's a pretty educated guess. But I think that's what it would take to do it right, and to fill in those manpower holes everywhere else to make the force healthy. That's probably not going to happen. Now, some of this we can do through the Guard Reserve. They need to be plussed up as well, because they're a major part of this effort. They're in every mission area we have. So as we grow the active force to 321, we're also growing the Guard Reserve, but not in big numbers. But somehow we've got to change this equation, or we've got to divest the things that all those people are still operating and get to the new stuff. Something has to change, or we risk breaking the force. Yes, sir, in the back.
Hi, sir. Pat Host with Defense Daily. There was a news report out this morning that Senate appropriators want you to start using fixed-wing aircraft to replace the Hueys at the nuclear sites. Obviously, this is just a news report, but have you thought about using fixed-wing aircraft to replace these helicopters? I'm wondering how many more years do you expect to get out of these Hueys? And if you were to use fixed-wing aircraft, what platforms would you use? And is it feasible? Where would the money come from if it's more expensive?
God, I did not see this article, so I'm not sure what the logic was, but I'm just looking, I'm thinking of the missions we use the Hueys for. I mean, one of them is convoy security and escort, and the ability to respond rapidly to a problem on the ground if you have convoy security. You can put a lot of firepower on the ground from a fixed-wing airplane. I'm not sure how you're going to put support on the ground from a fixed-wing aircraft. The other mission is for response for missile field security incidents. And it's moving security teams to the response site. I'm not sure how you do that with a fixed-wing airplane, so I'd have to see the article to really comment on it. I can't imagine a fixed-wing aircraft with the capability we need for those 2 missions is going to be cheaper than a helicopter, off the top of my head. But I just don't know what their argument was, so I'm afraid I'm shooting in the dark here. But we have a plan in place now to recapitalize the UH-1 fleet. We had asked to do a sole source this year. That's meeting some resistance, so the backup plan is to do a full and open competition but get this on the books. We have the money in the budget, plan to do it. We've identified that money. And so we're moving forward with replacing the UH-1. There's no question we need to do it. I mean, it's interesting that we're having this fear about the UH-1, which is a little bit younger than the B-52, the tanker, the T-38, the U-2. We have this problem with a whole lot of fleets of airplanes. It's not just the UH-1. Yes, ma'am.
So I wanted to follow up on Courtney's question, and then I also had a question about the nuclear force. In terms of Courtney's question on the F-22, is that, so it's my understanding that the bill with that language in it hasn't actually passed Congress yet. So are you looking at that ahead of being asked by Congress to look at it, or are you working with a certain office? So I'm just wondering what the timeline is on that.
We've been asked in the past, not in law, but we've been asked by Congress to look at this number. We don't have to pass a law to get us to answer the questions.
Okay.
And so, yeah, we've been looking at this for a while.
Okay.
And I think it's an important number to be able to provide people. We need to understand it clearly.
Okay, I just wanted to
Because this will
clarify.
keep coming up.
Okay. And then on the nuclear recapitalization, you said you don't have the money to recapitalize the nuclear force right now. So are you pushing forward with asking Congress for a separate pot of money like the Navy is doing for the submarines? And are you getting any traction with that, or are you meeting resistance?
We have not asked Congress to do that. We've been asked by Congress if we thought that would be helpful. The Secretary answered that question last year and said, well, if there's a fund that does this, it should be a fund for everybody. We have not been asked formally and have not provided a formal response to anybody on this. She was just asked that in our prosper hearings this year. I think the Navy doesn't have enough money for their nuclear recapitalization either. I mean, there's not enough money in the budget to do it right now. So this is a debate that has to happen. I suspect it'll be a focus of the new administration pretty quickly after coming on board as they look at their first budget cycle, because the big money involved in it is going to appear in the next budget cycle. And it's expensive. There's nothing inexpensive about nuclear deterrence. And so the question is, if you are going to have it, is it going to be done right? Really, from an operational perspective, that's the question. Again, this is something we don't decide. The policy decision is, will you have a nuclear deterrence capability or not? If the answer is yes, then our job is to tell them how to do it. Here's what you need to be able to do it right. And that's our piece of this. So we're working hard to provide it. We have opinions on whether it's useful or not. I think it's been pretty successful for a lot of years now. It's been the backstop of our national security. If we want to go another direction, the nation needs to make that decision. If we want to stay with this, then we need to recapitalize it. It's old. It's really old. Like everything else. And we got to recapitalize it. This stuff does not come cheap. It never will. And that's why you go back to priorities of the nation.
So would you argue that the B-21 and the ICBM should be in a fund as well?
I'm not arguing for a separate fund. But yeah, the B-21 is part of nuclear recapitalization. There's a number of things that U.S. strategic, we don't establish a requirement either, by the way, to make this clear. The Air Force buys capability to meet combatant command requirements. So U.S. Strategic Command established a requirement for the B-21, for the long-range strike option, for the GBSD. All those programs are U.S. Strategic Command requirements. That's the intent of the meeting. And so that's what we're trying to do. We build programs to meet combatant command needs. And then we make sure the program looks viable, we show the capability it presents, and we argue for the funding for it based on that. And then once we get a decision on funding, we move forward. We either move forward with the program or we adjust to something different. And it'll be the same in this case.
Chief, before Bernie closes us out today, on behalf of all of us, thanks. And as an airman and speaking also on behalf of the industry here, I think over the last 4 years, we've got the strongest Air Force and industry partnership we've ever had at the time in the nation. Thanks for your leadership. You built a great team across our Air Force. You built a terrific team, I think, between the Air Force and the industry. So thanks again. Amen.
Thanks, Lord. Amen.
General Welsh, I think General Wright said it brilliantly. I reflect on my time being affiliated with the Air Force, and I can't think of a time I've been more proud to be associated with it, and a lot of that's due to your leadership, so thank you, sir. We have for you a book. We picked one of our newest employees. You may be familiar with him, Larry Spencer. I don't know who he is exactly, but he has inscribed this to you. This is a book that we produce. It's one of the artists from our wonderful Air Force magazine, and if you're not getting it, it's because you're not a member, and again, you should be a member. And if you're not getting our electronic daily report, do that, because it's probably the finest source on Air Force. So, sir, on behalf of our president, on behalf of our chairman of the board, and our nearly 100,000 members, thank you very much.